Hello, everybody. Welcome into the Fantasy Pros Football Podcast. I'm Ryan Wormeli, joined today by Jake Ciely and by Pat Fitzmaurice. Guys, before we dive into the show, Fitz, the one thing you told me before we started recording today is no tournament talk because it's a sore spot. I don't care. Derek Queen hit a buzzer beater to send Maryland to the Sweet 16, just their second Sweet 16 in 2 decades. I am hyped. I'm rocking Maryland shirt. Of course, I've always got the Maryland stuff behind me. I will be polite, though. How are you holding up after this weekend?
I'm doing well, yeah. Tough game for Wisconsin. They played a bad first half, and then their furious comeback at the end of the game fell just short. But I was actually happy for Maryland, Worm, and I don't personally think that Derek Queen traveled. And even if he did, I know they missed a flagrant foul on one of the Colorado State guys they should have called. So do not let the haters ruin your joy.
Yeah, I will not. I simply refuse. By the way, it wasn't just one of Colorado State's players. It was their best player, and he probably could have been, arguably he could have been ejected for that. There was talk of it maybe being even warranting a flagrant 2. Didn't even get reviewed. I will not mention, because I'm classy, that I picked BYU in our Fantasy Pro Survivor pool.
It didn't go unnoticed, Worm.
Truthfully, it was because Wisconsin had played 4 games in 4 days the week before, and BYU's a mountain team, and they were playing in Denver. That was my entire analysis for making that pick. And
you thought too hard.
Yeah, it worked out well. Jake, how is your? I'm not sure what kind of betting you did or bracket pools, but how's your March Madness treating you, if at all?
Better than I expected, honestly. Like, if you're doing the ESPN one, I still have a potential to have like 1670 or something like that.
Nice.
Which I still have my Final Four. I still have my, I think 7 out of my 8 Elite 8. But like my first round, the very first day, I went 9-7. I Jeff Fishered the first day. That's how bad it was. But it didn't matter because I had a lot of the teams like going through. I was with you. Picked BYU. I picked Montana because that's where my wife Nicole went. So stuff like that. But missed a lot of those. But after that, everything was pretty expected. Like, I'm a UNC fan, and I was like, nah, they don't even deserve to get past the play-in game. So I didn't pick them warrantedly, so if that's a word. But yeah, my bracket's doing. The funny thing is, I probably watched a dozen games this year. It's the best my bracket's been in years.
This is for whatever reason, I do more betting on March Madness than I do any other sports, and it's been thankfully a lucrative weekend so far.
Time to do it.
It's just fun. Like it's like $10 on every game, but like even if your bracket's busted, you can still care and have fun. Yeah. It's obviously, I mean, I'm not going out on a limb. Everybody loves betting this event, but super fun time. But by the way, Fitz, I'm giving you a hard time. Maryland is going to lose by 30+ to Florida on Thursday, so I got to kind of get my kicks in while I can because it's not going to last. We are talking fantasy football today, not March Madness. Thanks everybody for indulging us there. We're going to be talking about some running backs that we're drafting, kind of going one in every round through the first 12 rounds. Just some early thoughts on kind of guys we like where they are, guys we think will end up being values by the time we get to draft season. Jake, before we hop into that, what do you got going on at The Athletic?
Yeah, so article, it's funny. It has nothing to do with football. It's fantasy baseball is dying, and how do we resurrect it? That article is coming out, but that's probably the last thing you're going to see for baseball because as the season kicks off, sayonara, all football, and I will have my draft prospects rankings before the draft that I always release so you can kind of get a snapshot preview. And I give credit to everybody, including the people on this network that do a much better job than I do, going like Debro, going way deep. But I know enough that I make the easy comparison. Like instead of being like, oh, he's great at this, bad at this, but I give you, this is what you should expect as the fantasy player. Like if he's going to be J.K. Dobbins, I mean that as in J.K. Dobbins, the fantasy player, to give you that really easy kind of comparison. And if you want stuff like Debro has, that's stuff that I even read.
All football going forward for Ciely. All football for us going forward on this episode. We're going to start right at the very top with round 1. By the way, quick reminder for everybody, all of our 2025 consensus rankings and tiers can be found at fantasypros.com/rankings. Obviously still early on, but it's fun to check out and kind of see what some of the early thoughts are from the experts across the industry. Let's start with round 1. Like I said, we're going to alternate. So Jake will take the odd numbered rounds. Fitz will take the even numbered rounds. Who you got in round 1?
Yeah, so this is the tough one because I'm like, well, it's obvious. Barkley, Gibbs. And so I went a little bit different now. I have him overall 13th. So technically he's not within my first round. But similar to last year where people are like, oh, I don't know if I want Saquon Barkley, and the people at the end of the first round benefited big time by taking him or even Derrick Henry. I think there's a case to be made that I have 4 wide receivers directly in front of this running back in the first round if we're going by overall. But if you want to pull him up to the 10th, 11th, 12th pick, because you might not get him by people being smart enough when we get to August, it's still Christian McCaffrey. Like I bring up the Barkley thing to say is like people are like, he's getting hurt. What is he going to do? Too many touchdowns are going to be lost. The thing about McCaffrey is like there's been some changes on this 49ers team, as we know. There's still hope on the offensive line. Williams is back, so we don't have to worry too much about that. But the biggest the conversation we have is if he plays 16, not even 17 games, he's going to be in the conversation for the number 1 running back, not 5, 7, 15. He will be in the conversation for the number 1 because it's McCaffrey, so it's only because of health. If you don't want to take that risk, I get it. But if I'm at the back end of the first round and I get a running back that can finish number 1 overall in fantasy, period, even ahead of the wide receivers, I'm going to roll the dice on Christian McCaffrey, and that's why I put him in round 1, even though right now his consensus is round 3.
Fitz, I want to get your opinion on this. You know, obviously a big name, somebody who's been the number 1 player in fantasy before. It feels like McCaffrey this is strictly about your risk tolerance, but is there a case to be made against him if he is healthy? Like if I guaranteed you we're getting 16 games out of McCaffrey this year, is he like no brainer in that top 3, or would you still maybe consider going a different direction in round 1?
If we knew we were getting 16 games out of him, he probably would finish top 3, like strong chance of that. And, you know, you guys both used phrases that I think are pretty important here. With Jake, it was roll the dice. With you, it was risk tolerance, Worm. And that's kind of it, and why Christian McCaffrey is not for me, at least not that early. Worm, I think you've heard me make this point on other podcasts about the overarching strategy of like knowing your competition in fantasy leagues. Like, you know, we play in a lot of leagues with other analysts and other people who get to do this full time and go to sleep dreaming about Pro Football Reference player pages, and just like all the work we put in, like studying this stuff. And other people, it's a hobby that they like to spend a couple hours on every August before they do their drafts. For those people who are going in against people who spend a lot more time on it than they do, I think Christian McCaffrey is a good pick, because you should take risks if you're going in against people who are maybe a little bit better armed with information than you are. But if you have a chance of outpicking a lot of your competition in rounds, 2 through 16, 18, then I don't think you should embrace the risk with Christian McCaffrey, because you're going to out-duel people in those other rounds. And I think you should be looking for the solid double down the line or the solid single to center rather than swinging for the fences. You know what I mean? I think strength loves certainty and weakness loves risk. And I think if you feel pretty good about your fantasy football acumen, and I think Jake should, because I've drafted against him, and I know that Jake is sharper than a steak knife, I don't think Christian McCaffrey is the way you should go in round 1.
Just as kind of like a wrap-up thought on McCaffrey, Jake, what is your confidence level that he will be healthy? Is there anything, just given what the injury was last year? I mean, obviously he's had some injury stuff in the past, although the 2 previous years before 2024, he played 16 games and 17 games respectively. So it's not like he had it recently in that profile. Do you feel like what we saw last year makes him an extra strong, extra risky compared to usual? Or are you willing to kind of write it off as just it was kind of the year from hell and you're going in at least somewhat expecting a healthy season?
It's more the latter because of the injury type. If we were talking about J.K. Dobbins' knee for the 3rd time, if we were talking about Nick Chubb's knee for the 4th time, like this, those are the kind of things, soft tissues that start to become recurring. Then I'm like, now I'm concerned. McCaffrey's had an injury before, like we know that, but these are all different injuries now at this point. Last year is kind of anomalous for running backs in general, something that we went into the beginning of the season saying like, okay, maybe he starts off slow, maybe he misses the first couple weeks, and then as we know, week 1 hit, and we're like, oh, I guess we're without him for half the year. And I think that's part of the reason you see him low too, is because people just got bit by him last year. But because of the type of injury, at least as of today, I put it this way, I feel more confident than his teammate Brandon Ayuk that he's going to be ready to roll week 1.
I think that's a telling way to put it. Let's go to round 2. Fitz, who you got in this round?
Bucky Irving. And Bucky Irving finished with 1,122 rushing yards, 392 receiving yards on 47 catches, 8 touchdowns, really good numbers. And the numbers could have been even better, frankly, because Bucky was only playing about a third of the Buccaneers' offensive snaps over the first month of the season, and also dealt with a toe injury in the middle of the season that curtailed his usage in some games. So there were only 7 games where Bucky Irving played more than half of the Bucs' offensive snaps, including their one playoff game. In those 7 games, Bucky had 6 touchdowns and averaged 127.3 yards from scrimmage. And by the way, Bucky had a snap share above 50% in each of the Buccaneers' last 4 games, the most important games of their season because they were in the playoff hunt or actually in the playoffs. And it was just the Buccaneers eventually figuring out that he needed to play way more snaps than Rachaad White. Bucky was second in yards after contact per attempt with 3.93 among all running backs with 50 or more carries. Fourth in yards per route run among running backs with at least 20 catches, behind guys like Kamara and Jahmyr Gibbs. 7th in PFF rushing grade. He averaged 5.4 yards per carry. And you know what? It all looked even better than the numbers suggest. Like the way this dude strings moves together and eludes tacklers, like Bucky Irving is the real deal. And I would be pretty happy if I could start with the top wide receiver in the first round and then come back with Bucky in the second.
Jake, Bucky is 16th overall in the early consensus rankings. Is that too high, too low, or just right?
Actually, at running back, I have him a little bit higher. Overall, actually, I have him a slight bit lower, just to give you an idea of where I'm leaning a little bit more into wide receiver this year. So what it comes down to is, it's funny, there's something that Pat said, as he pulled out something we said out, that he said in there, strings moves together. It's funny that people remember, I was really high on Bucky Irving last year, and I thought he was a significant threat immediately for Rachaad White, mostly because of the receiving game. My concern, and the reason I'm bringing this up is because it's actually foreshadowing a pick later I'm going to talk about with the concern for him, is that I thought he could get too move happy coming out of college. And the fact that, like, because he's so elusive and because he sees that opportunities, he can sometimes dance around too much and then get tackled. He had an additional level of patience. I don't know if that was because he started behind White or the Buccaneers staff, kudos to them, but you definitely saw it, and this is the ceiling that we really saw. So I think Bucky Irving, as long as they don't shock us, like there's just a world where I feel like they could pull a 49ers and be like, oh, round through, blank is still on the board. Let's get another running back, because they're so unenamored with Rachaad White that, like, I would just hate to see him kept in a timeshare. And that's my only concern, because coming out of college, I said, I could see Antonio Gibson. And you remember Antonio Gibson, that 1.5 year where he was giving the massive workload with Washington, was in the top 15 conversation. And that's my concern, is like, can he be Gibson always because of the team? So if the team trusts him at 250 plus touches, 100% locked in. I just had slight hesitation to trust what the Buccaneers are going to do.
Fitz, I want to quickly ask you, most people will be picking between a running back or a wide receiver in round 2. Would you rather have Bucky Irving or Brock Bowers in round 2? Because they're 2 spots apart in the early rankings.
Bowers. We did that show about first-round picks, and I think Bowers should be in the first round, so I got to go Bowers there.
I kind of thought you might. Jake, what do you think about that one, Bowers or Bucky?
Great callback, because I was on that show saying there's no way on earth I would take him in the first round. But since I've done another show on here, Pat, and you weren't there for that one, and I said I was saying round 3 at the time, but because of the trade and the quarterback situation, I would be comfortable in the second round. So around this range, it would honestly depend what I did in the first round, but I could see making Bowers the pick in the second round now. I'm okay with the second. Still not going to get me to go first.
When it comes to college basketball and March Mania, one thing is for sure, nothing is for sure. Upsets, buzzer beaters, Cinderella's advancing, top seeds going home early. It's all going to happen. Bet the unexpected, every upset, every day with DraftKings Sportsbook. With live betting, exclusive content, promos, and parlays, DraftKings is the ultimate college basketball destination for March. Ready to make your first bet? Check out the matchups and pick a team to win. It's that simple. I've done all my college hoops betting on DraftKings this year myself. I used my bonus bets to sprinkle a little money on some title futures. I threw a little money on Gonzaga at big odds. That one's over, of course, but I still have some on Tennessee and Duke as well. I didn't like betting on Duke. You just kind of had to, as good as they are. It's been a lucrative tournament for me, and that's all happening on DraftKings. First time, here's something special just for you. New DraftKings customers bet $5 to get $200 in bonus bets instantly. Bet the unexpected with DraftKings Sportsbook. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code FANTASYPROS. That's code FANTASYPROS for new customers to get $200 in bonus bets when you bet just $5 only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. All right, Jake, let's go to a fun one here in round 3.
Yeah, a fun one, and I bring him up because I would actually take him in round 2, honestly. And it's the rookie Ashton Jeanty. And obviously, assuming that he doesn't surprisingly get stuck in a timeshare, depending on who drafts him. But because of the draft capital likely being in the first round, it would be surprising if he did. And I'll just bring up comparison. I think he's better, mind you, better Kenneth Walker. But if you put Kenneth Walker and stop the split with Charbonnet and Kenneth Walker stayed healthy, everybody would have Kenneth Walker as a top 10 running back. And that's why I think Jeanty has the potential to even return round 1 value, depending on the team he lands on, similar to Barkley's rookie year, Zeke's rookie year. I mean, we could go down the list. There's a bunch. Even, let's go back. Bijan Robinson, despite being a mistake by many, even somebody who wasn't taking him as a top 5 running back was still, hey, I'll take him as an RB1 as a rookie. He still finished as an RB1. He just didn't finish as 2, 3, 4 like some people want him to be. So he's in the conversation to be an RB1 likely on his team, likely given his skill set and the workload being most important. Again, this is another player that comes into 250 likely touches. And again, better Kenneth Walker, in my opinion. I bring up Kenneth Walker to say stylistically, like a lot of people think Jeanty's the most elusive running back in the world. He's not. He's actually more of a tackle breaker than anything, which is okay. Like, he doesn't have to be Bucky Irving. That's not who he is. So Kenneth, you tell me Kenneth Walker ends up on the Cowboys or whoever people are, wish casting Jeanty to for 280 touches and he's not involved with somebody else, top 10 running back.
What is the dream landing spot at this point? I mean, obviously, we're not getting scared off by Miles Sanders and Javonte, but they've added somebody. Like, is it still Dallas?
It is, but I mean, I just, at this point, after what we watched happen last year, after what's been rumored, and like, as soon as they made the second signing, there was already rumors that saying this actually precludes them from taking somebody in the first round because Jerry Jones is going to look at something else. So there's a few landing spots. I think you put him on the Browns, even with their quarterback mess. And he steps in front of, somebody else who's going to be on my list. But the situation is there's a lot of teams that even bad offense is going to be fine because of the likely workload. 300 is probably in play on most of these teams in the first round. I would have said the Chargers, but, then they went and signed Harris, so that kind of changed that one. So there's still some teams in there, but I think if we wish cast them totally, it would be the Cowboys.
Yeah, Raiders, I feel like, is one that's gained some steam lately as an early pick there. Fitz, what's the range and outcomes for where you'll be ranking Jeanty depending on his landing spot? Like, if he goes to his dream landing spot, he will be ranked as high as what for you? And if he goes to what we would consider to be a very poor landing spot, he'll be ranked as what for you? How wide is that gap?
I mean, right now I've got Jeanty preseason RB6, and I probably won't come off that too much if he goes to any of the most likely landing spots, which I guess would probably be Raiders, Bears, Cowboys. I think he's somewhere between 6 and 12. I mean, the scary one would be the Jets. Like, I've heard some people suggest that they could take him and then maybe try to find a trade for Breece Hall. But if it was like Hall and Jeanty, that would be awful for fantasy. Everyone would be justifiably mad about that. But yeah, I mean, I think he's going to be special, and it's what Jake said about his tackle breaking. Like, this guy, his contact balance is remarkable and maybe the best of any prospect we've seen in the last, 20, 25 plus years. Like, Saquon was probably a better prospect, and Bijan was probably close to Jeanty as a prospect, but like, those guys had their special sauce was in other categories. Jeanty's contact balance is just like, you cannot knock this guy over without a couple of your buddies around to help out. Like, it's so hard to get this guy on the ground. It's ridiculous. And teams knew that he was the offense for Boise State. This guy did not see any light boxes in college, and it didn't matter. You couldn't stop him.
I promise you, he's not getting to round 3 in any draft, Simon. I will just tell you that right now. There would be a stunning upset if he does. All right, Fitz, let's go to round 4.
I'll go with Chuba Hubbard, who I think the ECR on him is like RB16, 41st overall. It seems as if people are still a bit reluctant to buy into Chuba Hubbard as a higher-end fantasy option at running back, but he was RB12 in fantasy points per game last year, half-point PPR scoring, 11 touchdowns in 15 games, average 91 yards from scrimmage. I think we have reason to be bullish on Dave Canales as a play caller for the Panthers. We saw improvement from Bryce Young last year, and we need Young to do reasonably well if we want Chuba to be close to RB1 range or at least high-end RB2 again. So I'm not really worried about the Panthers signing of Rico Dowdle. That was a one-year deal worth less than $3 million. Carolina gave Chuba Hubbard a contract extension last November worth $33 million over 4 years with $15 million guaranteed. So those respective contracts make it pretty clear that the Panthers view Dowdle as a backup to Chuba Hubbard, and I don't think we're going to see Jonathan Brooks until late in the season, if at all, after his second ACL tear in the same knee in a span of, 12 months. So I think Chuba Hubbard is pretty safe as the Panthers' lead running back, and he showed last year that's a pretty valuable role.
Jake, what do you think about Hubbard this year?
Yeah, I actually have him just inside the fourth round, actually at 42 overall. He's one spot behind Breece Hall for me. So I'm with Pat on this, and this is something talked about on a previous show as well, is that I said this is something I was wrong about. Like I was out on Chuba Hubbard last year, and it wasn't just Jonathan Brooks. It was that, okay, Jonathan Brooks, if he's 90%, is going to take over for Chuba Hubbard just because I was not that enamored with Chuba Hubbard. I was clearly wrong on what he could do. I thought he was a replacement level running back. And that was my fear of Brooks, that even if it happened in December and Brooks was just Brooks for the last month, it was going to be goodbye Hubbard. But the big important thing that Pat says here is that Dowdle profiles probably a slightly lesser, did a good job with the Cowboys. But as on the other show that we talked about, I wasn't the one to credit to what was said on that show, is that the team, the Cowboys, the incumbent being Dowdle, kind of said, fine, walk. Like $3 million, like we don't even want you back for that. We're going to take a risk on Javonte Williams. So that's kind of telling of what Dowdle is not going to be much of a threat to Hubbard. So I'm clearly with Pat on this one.
Let's stick with you, Jake, as we go to round 5. Who you got here?
Ooh, round 5, Alvin Kamara. And I laugh because I did it last year, and I'm going to do it again. Because even as the disappointment of Kamara's season, he was still a solid RB2, which was still top 15 in points per game with a mess of an offense at the end of the year, and was still fine. And now we have Derek Carr back, is not leaving this team as they screwed around with his money to try and manipulate the cap as the Saints will ever do. They will never stop. We'll be 70 years old, and they'll still be trying to finagle the cap for future years. But this offense, my point being is, even without Derek Carr, we can be fine with him as an RB2. And that's the thing. He's not an RB1 anymore. And that's also okay. But in round 5, if I can get an RB2 that I know is going to go out there every single week and put RB2 numbers up with the potential of RB1 numbers, they did the smart thing in getting rid of Jamal Williams because they have a kind of a replicant, in my opinion, of Kendre Miller. Again, this is maybe a team, this draft is super deep. Maybe they do something that shocks us, and maybe somebody falls to the 3rd round. That's a perfect compliment, like the old Mark Ingram days, and this kind of gets more scary. But as of today, if you're going to give me a top 20, 22 at worst running back in round 5, I'm going to hammer that pick all day long, likely because it'll be my second running back, because I'll already have 3 wide receivers, or maybe even 2 in Brock Bowers at this point. There you go, Pat.
Kamara, he's RB18, specifically when just looking at the position. Does that sound about right to you, Jake?
It sounds, actually, I think I have a spot or 2 higher, but that's about right for me.
Fitz, what do you think about Kamara in round 5?
Yeah, I've got him RB15, so I would love getting him here. He's, I guess for a while I was kind of worried about Kamara because he was maybe losing efficiency as a runner, but I think that was because the Saints were using him differently for a while. He had been used so effectively under Sean Payton as sort of part-time runner, full-time pass catcher. And he kept giving us those massive, what was the catch total he kept putting up year after year? Was it 83?
80.
Yeah. So,
80 something.
Yeah, and he's still one of the best pass-catching running backs we've ever seen, and still a pretty good runner, too. And yes, he's going to have a tag team partner, whether it's Kendre Miller, doubtful, or probably someone they draft. But no one's going to displace Kamara as the pass catching back because he's so good at it, and he's going to have a role in the running game too. So stable usage, and he's really shown no signs of slowing down. I think he'd be a great pick in the 5th.
Yeah, those first 4 years, 81 catches, 81 catches, 81 catches, 83 catches in year 4. You know what? I actually, obviously I know that bulk of his production comes through the air. I don't think I realized that he has never had 1,000 yards on the ground in a season.
Yeah.
I mean, I knew there was a split there for sure, but I don't think it ever really crossed my mind that he's never hit that total.
I think, wasn't last year the closest he got to?
950.
And that was in 14 games?
Yep. That's exactly right. So
to Pat's point about his usage.
Yeah.
Being different. Yeah.
That's interesting. What do we think, just quickly, Fitz, like, what do you think the Saints offense is going to look like this year in general?
Oh man, that's a good question. I don't know. Like, hopefully I know they had some injury issues on the offensive line last year. Hopefully that gets sorted out. That's a good question. I don't expect it to be a top half of the league offense, but I think it's going to be capable enough where I'm not downgrading Saints individual players because I have overall fears of the offense. Like, Carr can make an offense work. You know, he's not a superstar. He's not going to put up, lustrous passing numbers, 5,000 yards, 40 touchdowns, but he can make an offense go. So I'm not like docking Saints guys because they're in a bad offense.
Quick reminder that you can join our Fantasy Pros Discord community, chat with other fans, and get access to exclusive AMAs that wind up on our podcast feed. Here's our current schedule. Myself and Fitz at 5 Eastern on the first Tuesday of each month, and then Fitz and Boggs at 5 Eastern on the last 3 Tuesdays in April. That's the 15th, 22nd, and 29th. Obviously, going to have a lot of draft talk on those shows. Come get your questions answered and be on the show at fantasypros.com/chat. All right, Fitz, round 6.
All right, it's Isaiah Pacheco for me. And I think some people might have an issue with him in that round because people are going to remember that Pacheco wasn't able to fully reclaim his job from Kareem Hunt upon his return from a leg injury that cost him 9 games. But I think calling it a leg injury is really downplaying the severity of it. Pacheco broke his leg. Like, he came back from a fractured fibula in 2.5 months. There's no way Isaiah Pacheco was anything close to 100% capacity after he came back. So this is a guy who was being drafted in the mid to late second round in fantasy drafts last year. Now you can get him in the 6th. I think we're going to see a much better version of Isaiah Pacheco this year, one that more closely resembles the Pacheco of 2023. And obviously, he's in a pretty good offense with the Chiefs. Now, of course, all bets are off if the Chiefs take a running back sometime before day 3 of the NFL draft, but I would be pretty surprised if that happens. I think offensive line and defensive line are greater areas of need for Kansas City. So I do think it's going to be Pacheco sort of in tandem with, well, I think Hunt is still on the roster, and they signed Elijah Mitchell, but I still think Pacheco is going to be the lead guy here.
Pacheco's a really interesting name for this season, in my opinion. I mean, I was all in on him last year. We had Andy Behrens came on the show in August and like completely talked me into Pacheco being
Loved him.
A top 5 back. And I then started ranking him similarly myself. I was drafting wherever I could. So thank you for that, Andy. It was a lost season in his leagues, but I loved Pacheco last year. This year, it was such a sour finish, like even when he came back. But again, like he broke his leg. That's not an easy thing to come back from in the same season. Now gets the whole off season. I have always liked the player at the very least. Jake, what do you make of Pacheco as a 6th round pick?
Yeah, it would be fun if we had just agreed the entire show, right?
Jake.
So, yeah. Oh, yeah. Thank you for that. Hold on. The dog was barking, so I forgot to mute it on back. So anyway, I was going to say it's always a lot of fun when we actually disagree on something. So I'm actually going to, for the first time, disagree on this one. I have Pacheco in the 8th round. I'm kind of out on him just because it's not the injury and I know he came back from it, and that's part of the thing that clouds everything, but that Kareem Hunt looked better than him at times, and Kareem Hunt, let's be honest, is pretty washed. I think the thing that Pacheco, and maybe this just goes back to similar to Hubbard, maybe this is one that I'm just wrong about. Like, I just don't feel like Pacheco is great as a running back. I think he's just a guy. I think he's just a guy who gets what's given to him, and I think on 2/3 of the other offenses in the league, he's not Pacheco that we care about. And again, this is somebody that I was, didn't even have him as my top 25 running backs in 2022. So again, just be somebody I'm wrong about. Just never enamored with the player. And so it just comes down to the risk. And maybe part of that is hedging, and what Pat brought up too is that they do draft somebody and this just turns out to be a committee and then we're frustrated anyway. But there's other names in front of them, including even Tracy and Pollard, that I would take before I start thinking about Pacheco, and even some wide receivers. That's why I have him in the 8th. So this is one that it doesn't, for the first time in the show, we're like actually pretty opposite on this one. I'm a full 2 rounds behind on Pacheco.
Fitz, do you want to try and change his mind?
No, not really. And, we were talking about Bucky Irving earlier as a guy who strings moves together. And, if you like that kind of running back, Isaiah Pacheco is probably not going to be your type. I've said it before. Isaiah Pacheco is a guy who runs like he is trying to break through a door, basically. So there's not a lot of nuance to his game. And maybe that ratchets up the injury risk for him a little bit, admittedly. But, if he does get back to that role as the lead guy in Kansas City's offense, though, I think it's hard to deny that he's got, double-digit touchdown upside potentially and could be a 1,000-yard guy. But, yeah, there is risk for sure. I'm just a little more willing to embrace the risk in the 6th round.
Maybe we'll agree more on the round 7 player. Jake, who do you have here?
Yeah, because this shouldn't be around 7. This shouldn't even be around 6, assuming as of today that the Steelers don't surprise us. And again, we keep talking about this draft, but as of today, Jalen Warren's finally free. We clamored for 2 years that he looks better objectively, and whether you want to say subjectively by your vision. If you want the metrics, it backed it up. If you wanted to watch it, it backed it up. Warren looked better. Warren performed better. Najee Harris is gone. This backfield is now his as the lead. And the reason I say this is one where I don't see it as much, just because it doesn't feel necessarily like a Steelers move to go out there and bring in a significant threat, a complementary piece. Absolutely. A lesser Najee Harris, just more of a pounder to get the, short yards or something like that, because it's not Cordero Patterson. I think there's a compliment to be made with Warren, but I think we're finally going to get the 250 lead touches for Jalen Warren. And in that case, I will take Jalen Warren over Aaron Jones, who I think has more of a threat on his side of things, hint, hint to one of Pat's picks. And I do think that Warren is pushing top 20 at running back, which means round 7 is not going to last long. So if you're drafting now, hammer the living heck out of Jalen Warren and enjoy it while you can, because unless they pull a surprise pick of an Omarion Hampton in the draft, people are going to be loving Jalen Warren's value right now.
It's funny, you just alluded to this when talking about Hampton, but every time we have talked about running backs this whole offseason, it's come with the caveat of this class is amazing. So whoever we're talking about, be warned, it could change depending on where these guys go, because it's so deep and so strong. And, the Steelers could be a part of that conversation too. But I think we can just approach it as of right now is the best we can do. And I think Warren, round 7 even does look kind of low given how excited people are. Fitz, do you agree on this one or more disagreement here?
I do agree with Jake, and I kind of did think that the Steelers were going to take an Omarion Hampton or a Quinshon Judkins, but the thing that has me wondering about that and wondering if Jake might not be right about all of a sudden Warren getting more than 200 touches would be they signed Kenneth Gainwell, and that seems like a slightly redundant skill set with Gainwell and Warren. I think Warren is sort of a better version of Gainwell as this satellite back plus who can, work out as the passing down back, but can also sort of be a lead guy in a pinch. And maybe by signing Gainwell, that's the Steelers signaling to us that they see Warren as their lead running back. I don't know. I think they're probably going to draft someone from this running back class, but at this point, maybe it's someone on day 3, someone who's not really going to be a threat to Warren, who's shown that he can be really good in that role. So, I'm pretty cautiously optimistic about Warren too now, and I honestly, I'm still not sure I'd rather have Najee Harris, even though I know a lot of people love his landing spot with the Chargers. I think I might still rather have Warren.
I'll have them almost back to back. It's funny you say that. Harris just in front of him.
Yeah, I think Harris, the opportunity is just so sublime that
it is. But the Chargers are going to draft someone too.
Yeah. Examining it as of right now, like I said, very, very, much could
Well, they could definitely go different. You could see to your point, a day 3, an Ollie Gordon headed to back up Warren, where conversely, maybe a Tootin pass catcher ends up with. So that kind of scenario, which we would be happy about both.
Well, and that's the thing too. And again, we talked about this a lot on the Dynasty show, Fitz. Even those guys who are going to go in day 3, just because there are so many of them, can take jobs depending on the landing spot they get to. Like you shouldn't look at it as a running back needs to go day 1 or 2 to be impactful because the class is so good. Now it's going to be harder the later you go, and it depends on the landing spot for any of these guys really. But I wouldn't be scared away just because a running back goes in like the 5th round this year. That's not a warning sign the way it might be in other years, I don't think.
And conversely, like, don't assume your guy is safe just because his team didn't take a running back till the 6th round. Because, Taj Brooks might not go until the 6th round, but here's a dude who had like back-to-back 1,500 yards at Texas Tech and could steal the job of an incumbent somewhere.
No, bring up the one you brought up earlier. 4th round, almost in the 5th round, Bucky Irving from last year. There's your perfect example.
Yep.
Welcome now to this week's Chasing Challenges, brought to you by Microsoft. Just like the athletes who push boundaries and redefine what's possible, business decision makers today are turning challenges into opportunities. Microsoft meets you where you are with tools and guidance that help you make an impact with safe, secure AI solutions. Players and teams are facing their own challenges. In this segment, we spotlight athletes or teams that are currently undergoing a challenge, what this means from a fantasy or betting standpoint, and examine how we think they can overcome them. Whatever challenge you're facing, Microsoft empowers you with the expertise to say, bring it on. This week, we're discussing the challenge faced by Christian McCaffrey coming back from a lost 2024 season. CMC was one of the top picks in drafts last year, was the consensus top pick for a lot of draft season, but he ended up playing in just 4 games, failing to score a touchdown or top 250 combined yards on the season. How can he overcome this challenge coming back from injury as a running back nearing 30? If he stays healthy, he should be right back at the top of the running back scoring leaderboard in 2025, possibly leading you to a fantasy championship in the process. With that upside, he makes a lot of sense as an early round pick, as long as you're willing to stomach a little risk. That's it for this week's Chasing Challenges. Remember, Microsoft's AI solutions empower you to take bold steps and make informed decisions, sparking new ideas to help drive your business forward. With Microsoft as your trusted partner, you can navigate your journey with confidence, finding innovative solutions and reaching new possibilities. Visit Microsoft.com/challengers to learn more. All right, Fitz, round 8. Where are we looking at running back?
Yeah, round 8 was kind of tricky because there aren't a lot of running backs in that range, and 2 of them are on the same team. Travis Etienne and Tank Bigsby of the Jaguars both fall into the 8th round range. Now, normally I would want the guy who's going to be the pass catcher, and that would be Etienne. Not in this case. I mean, Bigsby was the far superior runner last season. He averaged 4.6 yards per carry. Etienne averaged 3.7. Bigsby averaged 3.74 yards after contact per carry. Etienne was more than a full yard behind at 2.48. Bigsby forced 46 missed tackles last year. Etienne forced 17 missed tackles and only had 18 fewer rushing attempts than Tank. Bigsby averaged 0.74 rushing yards over expected per carry, which ranked 9th in the league. Etienne was actually underwater in that category, negative 0.28 rushing yards over expected per carry. So Bigsby was better than Etienne in pretty much every rushing metric last season, and it wasn't close. Now we've got Liam Cohen coming in as the Jaguars head coach and play caller. And when Cohen was the Buccaneers play caller last season, his backfield was a meritocracy. Like, Rachaad White was getting a majority of carries early in the season, but then it became clear that Bucky Irving was much better than White. And down the stretch, it was Irving getting a clear majority of snaps and touches. So I think Tank Bigsby is the Jacksonville running back to draft this year, but his ECR, 1 spot behind Travis Etienne at the RB position right now, 3 spots overall. I'd much rather have Tank.
Jake, what do you make not just of Tank Bigsby in the 8th round, but really the backfield as a whole, kind of the split between him and Etienne, and of course, the new coach and play caller of it all that Fitz just alluded to?
Well, yeah, I was going to say that actually includes Udinski as well, who comes from the Vikings, which go back to the Vikings and look at their running back situations. A little bit of a split, but they do lean more on one in the time that he's been there. So they've tried different ones previous years to failing degrees of difference there, but they try to kind of find that 60 to 65% lead option. So I'm worth rolling the dice here with Pat on Tank Bigsby, even though, like, Bigsby might not be my favorite running back. I still think ETN is better. Lost season, I don't know if it was in his head. I don't know if he wasn't 100%. I don't know what happened. Like, I know ETN's a better running back. I think everybody will admit that than he was last year. But the door swung open. And as Pat said, Bigsby looked better last year. This is kind of going to the Warren situation, as he looked better. And if you're talking about somebody who could probably handle more of a clear lead and keep ETN in that change of pace, that actually makes more sense between the two of them. My real concern, but this is okay because it's only round 8. My real concern is it's Cohen and Udinski. This might, shocker of all shockers, the Jaguars have other needs, but what if they do this option? What if they pull in a rookie running back in the second round and saying, hey, we're going to find somebody we like. We don't actually like either of our options. One of them needs to be a timeshare piece. I'm just saying, like, unlikely, and in round 8, even if you told me that right now, I'm still going to gamble with Pat on Bigsby in the 8th round. But I just think there's a slight possibility because this is a new regime, and we see this a lot of times where they come in and it's not just one or two running backs. They just cast them both aside and go on with who they like.
Fitz, let's say you're picking in the back half of round 8 and Bigsby's already off the board. Are you interested in ETN around here too, and you just happen to like Bigsby better, or are you avoiding him?
Yeah, I mean, like, ETN's pass catching ability is going to create some value unless we get the doomsday scenario Jake was talking about with a day 2 running back to the Jaguars, in which case, just burn this video of this podcast and
sorry, I put it into the world.
But yeah, I mean, like, and ETN was good. It's weird. The midpoint of the 2023 season is where ETN started to go downhill, because over the first half of the 2023 regular season, I had him on some teams and he was averaging like 20 PPR points per game. And then there was just this all of a sudden shift where he was averaging like 12 PPR points per game. He had been an engine, and all of a sudden, like, the engines gave way and the ship wasn't moving. So I'm not sure what happened there, but really it's been like a disappointing year and a half for ETN. So I'm not real eager to buy in, but back half of the 8th round, maybe.
Let's go to round 9, Jake.
Yeah, I'm going back to the rookie pool. That long tease from earlier when I was talking about trying to do too many moves, it's finally going to pay off if you were waiting for that. Trey Henderson or TreVeyon, and apparently now Trey if you went to the combine. But Henderson is somebody that's love his moves, love his vision, loves how he just kind of sees the field almost like you're playing college football or Madden on the game, and you can just see everything. But because of that, he can get move happy. He can sometimes make too many moves before he makes his decision. So that's why I go all the way back to the Bucky Irving situation, is I can actually see Henderson in a Bucky Irving type situation, and maybe round 3 or 4. I honestly wouldn't be surprised if somebody rolls the dice on him round 2, given his talent, knowing that they can coach his mind right, because he's somebody, when you watch, and then you go back to his freshman season, people were like, oh, he's going to be a first rounder in 2 years. Let's not forget about that. And then the injuries, somebody who has an injury career and then got split carries, as we all know, with Judkins. But you go watch him, even post injury, it's like once he decides to go, like cannon, like goodbye, gone. Like you know how there's some running backs when you see them make their cuts and decisions, it's like, oh, that was a really smooth cut. Like his is just, he does it and then it's boom, gone, shot of a cannon. So I love Henderson and I love his vision because of that. If the coachability is, that's the only part, is that he's too move happy, I think he can get away from that. And around 9, this is egregious. Even in a timeshare, I'm probably taking him around the Bigsby range, maybe even a little bit earlier, depending on the right team.
Yeah, I did a startup Campus to Canton draft a few years ago, coming off of Henderson's freshman season at Ohio State, and he was the 3rd pick in that format. It was like Bijan, I think it was JSN, and then Henderson went. So like there was so much juice around him at that time. And it's really hard for me to forget that. Like, I still look at him and I'm like, man, that is a talented, that's a running back that I just want to watch and that I want on my team. I am like super in lockstep on this. I think as of right now, I go back and forth in this, so don't like hold me to this long term. As of right now, I would say my top 3 running backs in the class, like I think 1 and 2 are fairly easy in terms of Jeanty and Hampton. Number 3, I think you can make the case, and some people would maybe say Caleb Johnson, some people would maybe say Quinshawn. I'm saying TreVeyon Henderson. Like he is my RB3 right now.
It's funny you say that, because last year, I had Brian Thomas as 1.5 at wide receivers because I wanted to put him with Harrison, Odunze, and Neighbors, but I was like, you can nitpick just a little bit. So I bring that up to say is like this year I have obviously Hampton and Jeanty, and I'm going to have a 1.5. Like I think Henderson deserves this. Like you're almost there, and this next group are all super talented, but if it just all the scenarios being the exact same scenario, I would still take him knowing that over every single one of them. And that's how I kind of get that half of a tier.
And Fitz, I think it was a great point that Jake makes in that even if he's in a timeshare, he is so explosive. Like he doesn't need all the touches to be a valuable fantasy asset. It's almost like a poor man's version of early on career Jahmyr Gibbs, where even if he's splitting carries, he can break a long one at any time, and those are still worth a lot of fantasy points. So yeah, I'm all over Henderson, especially this late, Fitz.
Yeah, and it's pretty much guaranteed he is going to be in a timeshare, but that's fine because there are only, less than 10 true workhorses in the league at any given point, and most of the backfields are 2 or 3 man committees. Henderson was meant to be part of a committee. I mean, even in this last year at Ohio State, he didn't have more than 11 carries in any game until the championship game against Notre Dame, and then he had 12 carries in that game. So, he was sharing that backfield with Quinshon Judkins. It didn't matter. I don't really have anything to add to Jake's thumbnail scouting report because he summed it up pretty well. This guy is just electric when he has the ball in his hands, and he can catch passes. So there's dual threat capability there, and Worm, he's my RB3 in this class too.
Yeah. I wonder what the consensus will end up being. It feels like he's probably the favorite to be RB3 right now. Maybe I'm wrong about that. It's kind of anecdotal from reading other people's rankings. There are definitely other guys getting mentioned, but I feel like he's the most common one I see. I wonder how much of a consensus that will be by the time we get to late April and May. All right, Fitz, let's go to round 10. We'll go a little quicker here on the last 3 names.
All right, it's Jordan Mason of the Vikings, and the Vikings traded for Jordan Mason earlier this month, and I love this move from Minnesota. They run outside zone at one of the higher rates in the league, and that's right up Mason's alley. Kyle Shanahan's 49ers run a lot of outside zone, and we saw Mason excel in that system last season when he had to replace Christian McCaffrey. So the Vikings don't have many picks in this year's draft, just 4. They have their first, a compensatory 3rd, a 5th, and a 6th. And to get Mason, they gave one of their 5ths this year for a 6th this year, and they also gave the 49ers a 6th in 2026. So with only 4 picks, I don't think the Vikings are going to draft a running back. So Mason pretty much locked in as the backup to Aaron Jones, who's 30 years old and hasn't always been super durable. I think Mason is going to be more of a 1B to Jones's 1A rather than a strict backup. So Mason might have some standalone value, and if Jones were to miss any time, Mason would be a guy you would unquestionably want to start in fantasy while Jones was out. So I think he's a terrific 3rd running back for your fantasy team this year. I mean, the dude's averaged 5.3 yards per carry in more than 200 career carries. Like, he's a good player, man.
Yeah, somebody who you think will bring more value than a handcuff, but that in a scenario where he does step into the role because of injury, like a handcuff, immediately becomes just like a very, very high level fantasy starter given the situation. I think that's a really fair assessment. Jake, what do you think about Mason?
I'm with him on Mason, mostly just because of nothing else. This was great for, we did winners. That was the show I was on, and Isaac Garendo was a winner because Mason's gone, but they're both winners in this move, and they are both within the exact same tier of a high-end running back, might get a sprinkle of touches, but mostly if the lead goes down, we're talking about potential bell cow work for both of them. And in 2 offenses that we would be super happy, even if you were just a random replacement running back. And these are 2 talented running backs. So I actually really like this pick.
And of course, we're in the range of the draft, right? Round 10, round 11, round 12, where you're not getting surefire starters. So you want to kind of find that upside and guys who can still contribute maybe, but even if they're not contributing, the upside is super high in a scenario where their situation changes. Let's go to round 11, Jake.
Yeah, it's funny you say surefire. Thank you for the segue. Because as of today, he's a surefire starter. I think the conversely to what Pat was just saying, the Browns do have a lot of picks, and the Browns could make a timeshare situation. But even so, the reason I like Jerome Ford here is because how many times have we seen this before with, hey, the NFL draft process isn't perfect. Scouting's not perfect. Running backs themselves are not perfect. Like, we could even say a lot of people are in on Devin Neal, which I like, or on RJ Harvey, or somebody like, oh, the Browns draft, and everybody's like, aha, they're taking the job. Goodbye, Jerome Ford. And we've seen before, like, talented running backs come in and they don't take the job. Something doesn't work. Maybe they end up being a bust. So to get me a starting running back here who has performed and is performed on the terrible Browns offense, I think that, hey, you know what? Do I want him as my RB2? Absolutely not. He's not even your RB3 in this range, likely. This is basically, hey, I'm going to put him in a potential trade down the road or a flex situation, or maybe my running back gets hurt and I have a mediocre RB2, but I have a starter. So no, I'm not like, oh God, I got to go get Jerome Ford. But if that's part of the draft, he's a starter as of today. And a lot of it is just, oh, what are the Browns going to do? Well, what if the Browns don't do anything till day 3? And then we're like, man, we should have been on Jerome Ford.
Fitz, what do you make of Ford in round 11?
My take is pretty much the same as Jake's. Like, we expect the Browns to do something at running back, but even if they do something at running back, like, Ford is going to get work. And he's kind of been good whenever they've called upon him. Like, the sneaky stat on Jerome Ford is that he's got 81 catches over the last 2 seasons. Like, he just kind of does it in a quiet way, but he has been a really good role player for the Browns. I would expect him to continue to be, and probably not a guy who's going to have standalone value if the Browns do go out and get themselves an Omarion Hampton or a Quinshon Judkins or Caleb Johnson, someone who can be a lead back, but a guy you would, again, be starting every week if something happened to the lead back and Ford was next man up.
Let's wrap up with round 12. Fitz, it's a guy that you have liked dating back to last year.
Yeah, we're getting a little thinner here in round 12, but Ray Davis, who's got a RB 46, 135th overall ECR. I just think he's good. He had 6 touchdowns in only 130 touches last year. 3 of them were touchdown catches. Davis was actually really efficient as a receiver. I mean, small sample size, yeah, 17 catches. But he averaged 9.9 yards per target, which is like crazy good for a receiver, let alone for a running back. And when James Cook missed a game against the Jets last October, Davis balled out. 97 rushing yards, 55 receiving yards. Yes, it would probably take a James Cook injury for Davis to be startable in fantasy, but I do think Davis is already one of the better backups in the league. He plays in a high-powered offense, and I think he's a pretty nice target for the latter part of the draft when you're building your depth.
What do you think about this one, Jake? I mean, likely more of a pure kind of handcuff play than some of these other backups we talked about already, but do you agree with the upside being really apparent if he got the opportunity?
I do, and my comparison for him, again, fantasy purposes, was Jamal Williams, which isn't a bad thing. Like, I'm talking about good Jamal Williams. The one that we remembered was an RB2 with pushing RB1, who was pretty much a backup for most of his career. But the reason I'm with that, and you say the backup and what everything Pat said, is because I have a really giant tier 5 right now. Now it starts at 37 for running backs and goes to 49. But it starts with Charbonnet and ends with Braylon Allen. Isaac Rendo's in there. Tyler Allgeier's in there. J.K. Dobbins, not knowing what his team is just because of him. But Blake Corum, Jalen Wright, and Ray Davis. Ray Davis is in that group because they're all names that, I mean, this is Jordan Mason's in this group. This is names that if something happens, they are going to be a top 20 running back. And I think they deserve to all be in that range, to the point being of why take Charbonnet at 37 in round 7 when you could take Ray Davis here, because you're not starting Charbonnet anyway, unless something happens to Walker. You're not starting Davis unless something happens with the James Cook, but you are going to get similar value if both things were to happen.
Quick recap of all the running backs we talked about today, going from round 1 to round 12. Christian McCaffrey, Bucky Irving, Ashton Jeanty, Chuba Hubbard, Alvin Kamara, Isaiah Pacheco, Jalen Warren, Tank Bigsby, TreVeyon Henderson, Jordan Mason, Jerome Ford, and Ray Davis. We will wrap up there. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to this week's episode. For Jake and Fitz, I'm Ryan Wormeli. We'll see you again next time.